Yo, what is up, YouTube boxing family, YouTube gaming family, YouTube history family. It is I, the Libertarian Metaverse, and we are reaching in the Libertarian Metaverse philosophy. So yeah, let's talk about it, man. I'm gonna make this video before I get completely knocked out. But yeah, let's talk about it. Did black Africans sail to the Americas before European settlers or European colonial travelers made it out to the Americas? So yeah, this is gonna be a pretty controversial debate. I don't really know how to really respond to that. But I think honestly, when it comes down to it, man, this is a really tough discussion to have because, for one, I don't know and you don't know.
Casual out there, bro.
Sorry. Yeah, so I don't know and you don't know what's going on in terms of history, but we can't really tell who really came over to the Americas, and honestly, predating to human history, starting when humans were hunter gatherers in like the early 100s or 200 BCE, or like ancient time frame before the actual political time frame of what we call the current modern era, which that would even date back even to the very first 1,000 years of, well, I wouldn't even say 1,000 years, but when people make up these political timelines as far as what the very first pre-colonial and post-colonial states, we obviously go back to the medieval times. We go back to the African kingdoms, but obviously where statism had breeded versus non-status areas, i.e., anarchic areas, in which we could definitely call those places anarchic. Anarchic societies in which people have built, beyond mutual decentralized ethics of their own beliefs. Obviously, that still exists today because anarchy itself is metaphysical of its own nature, and we humans will always seek to that whenever we see statism to be unfit. Obviously, statism not being like the super duper mega religion, compared to its past, because obviously where statists were breeding in certain areas, there were always anarchic, libertarian built societies that people have built in response to it. So either way, I think once libertarianism purely takes over the entire world for the future, I think anarchy of itself will prove to be naturally stagnant in or naturally contingent in human lifestyle itself. So let's just talk about it with African, African people. Did they ever have the ability to come over to the Americas? I.e., that would be mostly the Caribbean, or maybe America itself, or maybe Mexico, because Mexico is technically part of North America. Well, it's technically part of the Americas because it's in Central America, but Mexico is technically part of the North American chain, which would be the United States leading up to Canada. But Mexico shares that border with America because Texas and California and all the other Midwestern or Southwestern states, those states are very close by to the Mexican border, in which borders don't exist at all. But it's like still, like, you can even tell that Mexico of its own right, it's been very close to the American region for millions of years, even before humans were even thinking about settling in that part of the world. Because obviously mankind, believes that mankind had been spawned in Africa first, in which that is, somewhat true because, I think, in my honest belief, I truly believe that every human was brought to the world in different parts of the world. So our genes and our cellular implants of what makes us a human, we were all evolved in our own separate areas. So therefore, Our genetic gene pools have been formed through those geographical areas of what we call Asia, Africa, North America, South America, Central America, Caribbean, and all these parts of the world that you could think of. So I think either way, it's still, it's still like a, it's still like a reason to be curious about how did migration of humans coming from one area to another ever existed. But I think when we even talk about these things, we have to be, consistent as possible. So therefore, we're not preaching to a different choir of people that believe in lies that are not, you know, that are not, how should I say, that are not consistent with the, with the actual historic background of what is to be true versus what's not to be true. But yeah, let's dive into the to this topic. Did Africans make their way to the Americas before European settlers or European invaders, if you will? But the European travelers. That's what I'll say. Um, I don't think this is really consistent, but the evidence that I've been managing to find, there's a book called They Came Before Columbus," and obviously that's not really a valuable source of information, but it had some decent information where it was talking about there could have been certain artifacts of African travelers that came off the coast of West Africa, in which, we really don't know if Africans were really that heavily technologically advanced to come over to the States. Well, I'm not even so sure about America, but they say that well, as far as what the sources that are pulling off the information are talking about, which these accredited sources that I've managed to find, they weren't really super duper accurate with their information, and it's not to say that they're wrong or they could be right, but it's a really hard pill to swallow to understand if Africans had the ability to come over to America as far as of the chain of continents that are over there, which that would only mean the Caribbean or South America. See, now, certain people have said, as far as historians and people that study geographical, economics, or just people that are historical or scientific, observers of the world, they say that you can take a certain wave current from Africa to get over to America directly. But here's the problem. Africa is a very, very long distance from America or the Caribbean. And my issue with people thinking that Africans have the ability to build ships, it's kind of hard to tell because before African nations were actually collapsed or were in the process of collapsing, a lot of tribes were at war with, yeah, they were at war with one another for a lot of politicized reasons, but I don't think for a second that Africa was really ever heavily advanced, because the issue being is that how are these people or large groups of people or however many groups of people were able to come over from Africa to Caribbean or the Americas, if you will, depending on what part of America that they came, and how were they able to get the technology together and the resources together to hold their men or hold their sailors to go over to the Americas? As far as, going over there safely, because, but the thing is that when Africans were, even going to war with each other, you have to think about it like you had other rival groups of African tribes that were going at it with one another, and they weren't doing anything but just having wars with each other, and that's like my biggest issue, because granted, people want to say, oh, well, not every African group of people were like that. Okay, that's fine, but the thing is that how are these tribes able to trade resources peacefully and prosperously when there was no ever known fleets of African ships ever coming out of Africa. And if anything, what were these Africans built off of? Like, did they get their ships built off of other tribes that were able to share their resources to build the ships? Because you can't build like a raft to go from Africa over to the Americas. No, no, no. Like when people say that, oh well, Africans can build rafts and they could build, little tiny sailboats, if you will. No, that's not true. Because from what I know, the Atlantic Ocean connecting to the African seas that border, if you will, maybe like what, like the Red Sea, in which that's like closer to Greece, but either way, like, all the massive wave currents that are like, that you would have to go through from Africa to America. There's no way that at that time black people were able to build ships and manage to come to the States, or I wouldn't even say to the States, but to the Americas, all in one piece. Because of the issue is that you're having to go to war with other ships that were being, on sea, in competition with you, right? Because, but the thing is like, who else were Africans in conflict with? There could be, other tribes of African bloodlines that probably didn't want that other tribe to make it over to the other side of the world. And then on top of that, there's really not enough evidence to even show where were these African ships really, coming over from Africa and landing their cavalry over. Because if it is true that Africans were coming over to the Americas first, then American Indians would have some form of data showing, or there would have been some form of political artifacts or political evidence to show that Africans did come over way before, Europeans did. And the issue being is that we don't really know where that evidence is rooted. See, now people try to use like the Olmec tribe as a great example of potential African ancestors. And the thing about them is that we don't know what their bloodline is. The Olmec tribe is different from the Aztec tribe, just to put that simple. And the Aztec tribe in Mexico, from what we call in Mexico, that's a tribe different from the other tribe called Tenochtitlan. Obviously, I'm pretty sure that I butchered that wrong, but the Tenochtitlan tribe, that is the empire nation of the American Indians that were in, modern day Mexico as their own different type of nation. So I would assume when they were having their wars with other American Indian tribes, especially coming from South America, heading into Central America and the Caribbeans, there had to have been a massive split where other Indian tribes had to bring their bloodline into other Indian tribes to keep their heritage alive. And which is like, no heritage ever dies out, but the thing is like, when your state falls apart, you obviously have people that, represent the state, in a certain way where they have like a different way of seeing things. So, either way, just different bloodlines mixed with other people's bloodlines. So therefore you always have like a set of people that will have a different set of beliefs of what they believe in which I call those people shadow state, shadow status, tribal believers. Those are people that have beliefs of their previous, status, culture that is brought over to other tribes, cultures, like, as well. But either way, in terms of the American Indian, bloodline conquest, at that time frame, there has to be a certain level of, evidence shown where American Indian tribes had ever even made contact with Africans, like African travelers. And my only question is that if Africans did come over to the States first, what were they doing in terms of making contact with these people? Because the thing about it is like people can say all they want to say like, okay, well, there could have been evidence in Mexico at the time where the Olmecs were a thing. But the thing about the Olmecs is that we don't know their bloodline. There's no, actual, artifacts of their, fossil records that, that can show that their gene pool is rooted in African blood, and therefore we don't know if these, stone, statue, built, how should I say, drawings, right? Or sculptures, were ever to be rooted in African, skin tone like features, because, people just go off of, anything that's being shown through any historical artifacts, but people like to jump the gun to say, oh well, that's just how it is, and that's just how it was back in the old days. So therefore, we just have to like run with it, because why? Because they're not going to give you like a reason why. So I mean, those are like the weird historical, detractor idiots that I like to, call out on, because those people will always, jump the gun to say, oh, well, that's always historical fact. If you could find a historical piece of evidence to prove the argumentation to validate the burden of proof, where that's not really proof. You like, you have to actually, look into it, and you have to do the research to understand if that is the validated piece of evidence to prove your argumentation. So either way, I don't think that's enough evidence to find out if blacks were coming over to the Americas before European settlers. I think, if anything, if they were to come over, their existence probably didn't last that long. Because the thing is that you have to think about it, like a lot of black people that had conflict in Africa heading into the States, or heading into the Americas. Yeah, yeah, like I'm sorry. I always keep using the United States as the means of calling the Americas the, U.S. And yeah, like I'd be having some weird brain farts saying that. So my apologies when I say that. Um, but yeah, like I mean, like the thing is that when you think about the Americas, there's always been like a massive split in massive migrants, obviously coming from the American Indian travelers, or more so the, Eastern Asian to like somewhat Southeast Asian travelers that came over from that portion of the ancient, time frame of their civilizations, heading over to the Americas, obviously by foot, because American Indians were known to be nomads. But obviously, once they settled down and once they had their civilizations built, that's when the massive divide of their bloodline started to begin, because that's where, people believed in certain, ways of philosophy for being Iroquois or Algonquin or Shawnee or Apache or, Nashawata, like, obviously, like I'm not, saying that name as if that's a real tribe, but still, you can easily tell that, that there's plenty of tribes that have been built throughout all the chains of the American regions. And you know what? It's very interesting to see that there's like a lot of history built off of that, because a lot of people have built a lot of great relationships with one another that wanted to modernize, versus those tribes that wanted to go to war with one another, because they obviously had some weird, superstition, belief of trying to sacrifice people for the wrong reasons, and that's obviously not a good thing to do, because you obviously put yourself in harm's way for the sake of, doing harm for the wrong reasons. And I think that's never to be, appreciated. And I think American Indians, in today's time frame here in America, or just people that have bloodline of it, uh, in the America, like, Americas alone, they obviously understand that's past them, and modernity is important for human expansion, because obviously, people think living like the savage lifestyle, well, I wouldn't even say savage, but the primitive lifestyle, of being a hunter-gatherer type person means that you're not willing to modernize, and you're just willing to live inside of the wild for the sake of your own natural survival. And that's not always true, because people that do live that lifestyle tend to actually do pretty good surviving, because for one, you're a harvester, and two, you end up becoming a farmer naturally, because you start finding land, you're able to harvest your resources, and therefore you're able to advance your own people to become smart in what they're able to do as a hunter, but also to be known as a hunter-gatherer, survivalist farmer. So I think that's something great that American Indian bloodlines have done, and they've done a very, very good job. They've really put the world, on the map for for their recognition of hard work and skill. So I think, when we talk about African migration to the Americas being the very first visitors to the New World, which would technically be like Central America or the Caribbeans, the Carib Islands, like Puerto Rico, Cuba, or Dominican Republic, and all those areas, in which that was actually called Borican, because obviously Tainos had a massive occupation in their bloodline. It wasn't just in Puerto Rico exclusively. It was in a lot of parts of the Caribbean, in which people call it like the West Indies, in some part of the Caribbean, but the West Indies actually doesn't really exist, and I'll actually even make like a video on that, because I've been I've been thinking that the West Indies are like a thing, but the West Indies are that's just like a regional area that they label to put a little small slither of the greater or lesser Antilles in the Caribbean, to label that the West Indies. But the West Indies is not really a thing, and being West Indian is not really a actual bloodline. That's just like a term that certain historians have labeled in a small part of the Caribbean, in which I would assume that's probably they're probably talking about maybe Haiti, or maybe Jamaica, or maybe the like that little country called Dominica, right? Or maybe the Dominican Republic. But yeah, the West Indies doesn't really exist. It's technically called the Caribbean, or you would just call it the Caribbean Islands, or the Greater Antilles, or Lesser Antilles. Yeah, Lesser Antilles. But technically the Carib Islands, because that's really what it is at the end of the day. But yeah, to finalize this argument, um, I don't think black people were really that much of travelers coming from Africa, and no matter how much research that people try to say that could be there, I don't think that is enough evidence to prove that African settlers ever had any power to build ships capable enough coming out of Africa, obviously when Africa was in massive war with other nations. And the issue being is that um, a lot of people really do think that's something that black nations at the time, or black empires at the time, were able to build. And the thing about that is that if those settlers were able to bring the technology together to those areas, then did those did those same travelers from Africa ever inform the people of those countries or those empire nations at the time to tell more people to come over to the to the new world? Because that's my biggest problem out of everything. Because great, it's good that some black people, or maybe a good chain of black people, probably came over, but the issue is that what were they doing after that? Did you just settle there? Like, did black people make a foundation where they have like a certain historic manner that shows that Africans came over to the States first? Because Obviously, I'm not a proponent of believing in politicized history in the history books because obviously, statism is a very evil religion that tends to lie to you a lot when it comes to historical, revisionism. But that's what state government, nations like to do, with their with their public schools, all around the world globally. But if it is to be true that European settlers had more of an influence traveling over to the Americas first, before Africans, then that's where history textbooks will be the winner to lie to you to say that Europeans came over to the Americas, where it's not true because like American Indians were the very first migrants that were native to the Americas. But as far as Africans being the visitors, being like the ones to come after, I find it hard to believe because the thing is that you have to think about the countries at the time that were at war with one another. Obviously, in that period of statism, people were not going eye to eye, with one another, and yeah, a lot of people had a lot of different mindsets of what they believed in. And I think that's a problem, when it came to the African countries that were being formed and then broken down, and then other countries were trying to form, and other tribes wanted to kill other tribes. But, it was no different from European nations because European nations were still going to war with, with one another. And I mean, the only countries that were able to have their governmental, traveler or governmental paid travelers to go out there and explore the world. Obviously, Christopher Columbus and all the other, weird people that want to be claimed to be the very first travelers of the New World. Um, yeah, they'll get more credibility for visiting the Caribbean, which, they never really visited the Americas. European contact technically didn't come to the Americas, up until I'd probably say the late 1400s or well, no, definitely not the 1600s. Europeans were definitely coming over, but American Indians did not really see very first European contact up until the 1400s or the late 1400s, heading into to the early 1500s. So that would technically be called the I don't know. I guess at the New Age or the Old Age, heading into the New World era. So that is at the pre-colonial era, where you had European settlers that came in through any means possible by bringing their people in, and obviously, with them trying to enslave Africans from Africa, or buying slaves from the African nations that were selling them off to them. That's obviously like another story that we should really have a conversation of. But no, I think honestly the evidence shows a lot more validity with Europeans being able to successfully come over to the Americas, and their history isn't really that good when it comes to them trying to settle, because obviously we know we know how government migration would be of those people coming over, the colonial migration of the new world coming in with European settlers, being in competition with American Indians. They obviously did not come with good intentions. Probably a good portion of people did because, they didn't want to go to war. But the thing is that when you have governments going at it with one another, it's an imperialistic conquest where one nation state wants to take over the other one and just vigilantly impose their will onto people that never said yes to you to invite your lifestyle to theirs. So either way, it's a very disrespectful mindset to have, and colonialism is unjust. There's nothing good about it. It's always been irrationally stupid, and it doesn't show anything, valiant, or how should I say, valid out of its own talking points. But Either way, I don't think of any white person to be, majestically evil for, for having their beliefs of thinking that black people didn't have the ability to travel over to the Americas. Like I don't think it's really that much of a problem to even be in speculation of it. But it's just that, I guess that the thing is that with a lot of racist, revisionists of history, they like to say that white people were always the ones to come over to the States. Well, shit, to come over to the Americas first. Sorry, like I always keep getting mixed up. They're always the ones to say that the Americas were always discovered, by, Europeans. Obviously, American Indians did find the land first, but Europeans were the secondary travelers that were the only group of people to come over to the States through massive loads of migration by way of, colonial warfare. Well, I would say colonial warfare, but also colonial, intervention, where, the state itself obviously screwed up the peaceful migration of Europeans that wanted to come over, with good intentions, but government really caused a lot of issues where you can see a massive influx of political infighting between European countries that wanted to bring their people over to the Americas. And obviously, when you've seen the massive gentrification that European governments wanted to impose their will onto the American lands, such as South America, Caribbean, North America, like all these areas where, they were, heavily going back and forth for the wrong reasons to try to hurt people. And then those people ended up, revolting a lot. It caused a major influx in political, divide. So, either way, I mean, it's still bad. It's still evil. So, I don't know. I mean, that's pretty much, what I have to say. Um, do I think black people have the ability to come over to the Americas? I would say no. Just simply because of that the evidence just doesn't really support the argumentation to believe that Africans were, ever advanced enough to come over to the States. Well, to come over to the Americas in general. And, even if they were, why weren't there any more black Africans being informed by the African travelers that were, that went all the way over from Africa to battle all the crazy weather that you had to deal with, on the ocean, to head out to the Americas and then not come back to the African countries to inform more black people to come over to the Caribbean or, wherever that they settled. Like, I mean, that's just basically my whole thoughts on it. Like, I think if anything, if Africans were good enough to actually have their ships built and produce a lot more migration to send those people over, and they were able to inform more people from those nations, such as like what, Ghana, Gambia, Somalia, like all those West African countries that were able to be, informed that there was like a brand new world discovered by African travelers, and more people were informed to come over peacefully through peaceful migrational needs or peaceful migrational means. I think that would be very interesting. It would be very awesome to see the mass migration of African influence coming from the Africas or from the African, continental migration of immigrants that came over in droves to to come over to the South Americas or Central America or Caribbean. But either way, like I would say that the history itself just doesn't provide enough evidence of what these people were, coming in, and what were they doing coming over to the Americas. Did they just come over and just meet a certain group of people? But did they ever settle? Did they ever bring any bloodline traditions? Like, obviously, yeah, there is African influence in a lot of parts of the Hispanic driven areas or Portuguese driven post colonial nations, such as, well, there's only one, that would be Brazil. But then obviously the rest Spanish speaking countries, that's obviously through through the means of pre-slavery and post-slavery action that was brought over by the statist colonial governmental militaries that brought over African slaves. But I don't think black people had the ability to even come over before white European contact. But I don't know, it's just going to be very weird to even determine if that's even valid enough, with the proper evidence to propose, the argument to say that black people had the ability to come over to the Americas freely before white Europeans did, as second, human, migrants, behind the American Indians that were already settling there. But yeah, that's pretty much it for my TED Talk. Hope you guys enjoyed it. Um, I don't really have too much else to say. I think I've already made my point about it, but yeah, see you guys later. Peace out and goodbye. So, shout out to everybody. Peace, love, liberty, happiness. So, see you guys later. Peace out and goodbye. Bye.